China no longer even seems to need a war or an external shock. It is quietly unraveling from within. The air on the streets feels heavy, factories are cooling down, consumption is shrinking, and the only thing spreading everywhere is anger. As the end of the year approaches, these cracks are becoming impossible to ignore. Most visible of all is the nationwide wave of protests over unpaid wages. Whether state-owned enterprises or major tech giants, it has become increasingly common to see people gathering at construction sites, factories, and even media-related facilities, demanding to be paid for work already done. What is unfolding across many Chinese cities today is no longer a simple labor dispute. It is a struggle for survival. People whose livelihoods have collapsed are clinging to the last thread, shouting, "Pay our wages," sometimes even bringing their children to the protest sites. This cannot be explained away with a vague, "the economy is doing poorly." What is emerging is a convergence of depleted local government finances, broken project funding chains, and the hollowing out of labor rights, clear signs that the social foundation itself is beginning to fracture. In mid-December, for example, reports circulated of workers gathering in front of a project linked to Beijing's sub-center, confronting contractors and demanding overdue pay. On another day in Guangxi, rural migrant workers accused a facility affiliated with a party-line newspaper of not paying wages. In Shenzhen, sweeping pay cuts across tech-related companies became the spark that ignited factory-level strikes and protests. But what makes this moment different is that the demand is not simply "raise our wages." In fact, what erupted on the ground was the opposite cry: "Let us work overtime." It sounds like a complete inversion of common sense, yet for those involved, it has become a condition for survival. At a factory in Shenzhen, management announced it would strictly comply with labor law, enforcing a 5-day workweek and 8-hour days, while cutting or eliminating overtime. On paper, this was framed as protecting employee health. In reality, many workers saw their take-home pay collapse overnight. With base wages set at or even below subsistence levels, and with deductions for social insurance and housing funds, the cash left in workers' hands shrank even further. People who once earned over 10,000 yuan a month with overtime discovered that without it, life simply no longer worked. Shenzhen's rents, though they may look normal by big city standards, are a wall for low-income workers. Even a tiny single room can cost several thousand yuan a month. Add food, transportation, children's education, and remittances to family back home, and the paycheck disappears. In that context, the reality becomes blunt. Without overtime, you go hungry. Under such conditions, the 8-hour workday is no longer perceived as a right, but as a rule that destroys lives. At that factory, workers blocked the gates early in the morning, logistics trucks lined up, unable to enter. Banners displayed, in stark numbers, how income had plunged after overtime was cut. Some workers knelt on the ground, begging. What circulated there was not the idea that orders had dried up, but another explanation. Production had been shifted overseas, to factories with cheaper labor. Strict enforcement of labor law was widely interpreted as a pretext for downsizing and forcing voluntary resignations without severance, keeping wages at a bare minimum until workers had no choice but to leave. The protest lasted several days and ultimately focused on 2 demands: either restore overtime or pay fair compensation based on years of service and let us leave. In this moment, the structural dilemma of China's economy is laid bare. What workers are asking for is not luxury, but the minimum condition for staying alive. Yet when the system fails to recognize this, and when neither companies nor local governments can sustain it, society twists into something deeply distorted. The paradox that one can only survive through exploitation becomes reality. Protests over unpaid wages are not new in China. What is different now is their scale and frequency. Factories, construction, supply chains, and capital flows are all weakening simultaneously, while local governments lose the ability to plug the gaps. With the property market collapsing, construction contracts evaporating, migrant incomes falling off a cliff, and local debt exploding, delayed payments have shifted from exception to routine. And once routine sets in, Social tension becomes chronic fuel ready to ignite at any moment. Along the same timeline, the withdrawal of foreign capital is becoming increasingly visible. The movements of Japanese companies are particularly symbolic. Production hubs for electronics and precision components that operated for decades are shrinking or relocating, and local employment evaporates. But this does not end with a factory closed. Entire living ecosystems shrink along with it. Shops, eateries, dormitories, logistics, subcontractors, and small surrounding businesses. The lights go out not just in the factory, but in the entire regional economic cycle. Behind these exits lies an asymmetry between technology and labor. China is a vast market, yes, but production dependent on replaceable labor migrates to regions with lower wages and relatively lower political risk. If core technology remains in corporate hands and China cannot fully replace it, companies tend toward a final strategy: protect the technology and move the labor. This is not merely about cost. Policy opacity, data regulations, and a deteriorating external environment all accelerate the decision. What is striking is that the anti-foreign sentiment promoted by the state does not necessarily align with the everyday logic of urban residents. Even as propaganda stirs hostility toward Japan, many people feel that politics is politics, my life is my life. Long lines at newly opened Japanese restaurants, or viral videos of locals helping lost foreigners, reveal this gap. People follow concrete daily needs and immediate benefit more than official rhetoric. And the harder daily life becomes, the more propaganda appears detached, floating above reality. Meanwhile, even in the capital, Beijing, the crisis is now sensed as an atmosphere. Shopping malls have lost their former bustle, stores sit empty, closures and discount sales are increasing. When consumption cools, the impact ripples across all sectors. Restaurants, squeezed by rent, wages, and input costs, shut down. The fact that dealers in second-hand equipment are busier than ever signals a rise in business closures. Seeing entire food courts shuttered, with dismantled equipment piled like scrap, is not just an image, it means the city's stomach is shrinking. Unemployment is not just a statistic. It is a sudden layoff notice, no compensation, and the cold response of, "If you want to sue, go ahead." The more such stories circulate, the more people tighten their wallets. Then sales fall, more shops close, and employment drops further, a collapse of the cycle. Financial pressure also opens cracks within families. Economic breakdown manifests as tension in human relationships. When life is cornered, conflicts erupt first among those closest. At the same time, urban administration hardens. Entry checks, surveillance, identity verification, restrictions on public space. The weaker the economy becomes, the more rigid governance grows. But the more rigid governance becomes, the more suffocating daily life feels, and the lower the social temperature drops. Cities slide into a strange state. People are present, but vitality is gone. During this same period, suspicion toward new Chinese electric vehicle companies has grown. At one launch event, footage circulated of a car's hood suddenly popping open. Allegations followed that the company tried to delete the video from domestic platforms. The footage later resurfaced overseas, amplifying the scandal. The more a company sells safety and technology while responding to problems with silence and deletion, the more distrust spreads. In another live stream, a phone car integration demo reportedly froze and failed to proceed as planned. The company blamed network issues, but viewers saw something else. In the same environment, other devices worked. This one did not. Videos also circulated of automated parking assistants allegedly veering toward water, alongside references to past incidents. The core issue here is not a single defect. When a product directly affects public safety, what matters most is how the company handles incidents, what it discloses, how it assumes responsibility, and what transparency it shows. If crisis management appears dishonest, trust in both technology and brand collapses at once. Stock plunges and loss of supporters feel less like technical failure and more like failure of governance. The political center is also shifting. Toward year's end, a lengthy text circulated in overseas Chinese communities, calling for the top leader's resignation and compiling arguments about personal conduct, governing capacity, and institutional destruction, a reckoning of 12 years of rule. The speed of its spread was itself symbolic. What is difficult to utter domestically becomes a real topic abroad, discussed openly and then reflected back inward. The debate focused on 3 points. First, criticism that state institutions operate according to personal will, privatizing power. Second, that heavy-handed interventions breaking market rules have shrunk the private sector and intensified capital flight and youth unemployment. Third, that abolishing term limits destroyed the last institutional safeguard and tied the nation's fate to the physical and emotional state of a single individual. Reactions were divided. Some remarked cynically that the longer wrong policies persist, the faster collapse accelerates. Others argued that changing one person is not enough. Without systemic change, another authoritarian will simply replace him. Regardless of stance, the fact that once taboo topics are openly debated in overseas public spheres signals a shift. The political wall has not fully fallen, but the cracks are widening. Seen this way, what is happening simultaneously in China is not a collage of unrelated news. Protests over unpaid wages, paradoxical strikes demanding overtime, capital withdrawal and industrial relocation, cooling consumption in the capital, chains of layoffs and closures, collapsing trust in EV companies, and overseas debates over political legitimacy all are connected by a single line. Economic contraction breeds social tension. Tension distorts corporate behavior. Governance hardens. Hardening governance deepens distrust. Distrust pushes people to retreat further. It is a closed loop. What is most frightening is that this is not unfolding as a sudden collapse, but as a normal deterioration of everyday life. People grow accustomed to today being slightly harder than yesterday, to an extra dose of anger and silence. But that habit is anesthesia, and after anesthesia comes sudden rupture. The year-end wave of unpaid wage protests shows that society still feels pain. As long as pain is felt, collapse is not complete. But when pain spreads too widely, society responds in other ways. A country where a worker must shout, "Let me work overtime to survive," is one where the system has already lost its original meaning. The moment the 8-hour workday ceases to be a right and becomes a condition that leads to hunger, this is no longer just an economic crisis. It is a crisis of the mechanism that sustains human dignity. What China faces is not an isolated issue of healthcare, industry, or politics, but a test of social sustainability itself. China is not standing at the threshold of a major crisis, it is already inside it. Accumulated dissatisfaction no longer stays buried beneath the surface. The air grows heavy, urban breathing becomes shallow, and the eyes of the crowds lose calm. A tension that makes it feel as though a single spark could ignite everything seeps into the gaps of everyday life. One blogger described the atmosphere this way: anyone with sensitivity can feel that the density of the air has changed. Suppressed emotions are nearing a critical point, and the smallest stimulus could trigger an explosion. Most dangerous of all is the growing number of people who feel they have nothing left to lose. No marriage, no children, no assets, weak family ties, even fading attachment to the future. As hope is shaved down to almost nothing, even the shape of fear changes. And when fear transforms, society enters unpredictable territory. This anxiety is not abstract. In just a few weeks, several serious incidents occurred in Shenzhen, a megacity of more than 17 million people. Shenzhen is the industrial and technological heart of China, a place of dense control. That similar incidents repeated there in such a short time is widely interpreted as a sign that order is unraveling from within. It can no longer be dismissed as individual bad luck. Society is stretched to the limit. Minimal friction can lead to irreversible outcomes. Even more unsettling is that many triggers begin with trivial frictions: an argument, an attitude, a complaint, a single rating. These minor clashes can spiral into disproportionate consequences. Beneath this lies an environment where personal data, especially addresses, can be weaponized. Data collected for administration becomes a tool of threat. As ethics dry up and irritation grows, such data shifts from being useful to being dangerous. The star rating systems of delivery platforms have also become mirrors of social distortion. In theory, they improve service quality. In practice, they pressure workers. A low rating can mean fines, fewer orders, and an immediate drop in income. For someone already punished by the algorithm, one more bad rating is the edge of the cliff. Pressure without exit pushes people to extremes. This is not merely a clash between customer and worker, it is a structure in which algorithms govern life, strip away labor, dignity, and amplify everyday conflicts. Danger does not live only in the news. It drifts through street corners, roads, and daily routines. Working, yet being unable to withdraw earnings, watching income remain frozen while life moves on, accumulates wear and tear. Tensions grow at home, the mind erodes, and one day the pressure bursts during a commute or a shift. This is not a problem of individual temperament, it is a system where workers do not control their livelihood, and that instability turns human beings unstable. Even small tasks become extreme. Heavy loads, broken elevators, climbing stairs, all for minimal pay. People trade health for tips, selling their physical limits piece by piece. When working no longer guarantees survival, society quietly fractures. What collapses is not statistics, but basic trust. In crowded places, tension rises as well. Tourist areas, shopping streets, drinking gatherings. The speed at which arguments turn into violence increases. When the economy cools, emotional margins shrink. And when margins shrink, anger ignites at close range. This is crisis psychology. Not everyone needs to change. Only the probability needs to rise for society to become more dangerous. At the core lies an equation with no exit. Unemployment rises and incomes fall, but mortgages, debt, healthcare, education, childcare, and elder care costs do not decline. Basic costs remain. Debt accumulates. And instead of strengthening a real social safety net, the control apparatus expands. Posts are deleted, accounts frozen, words banned, legal channels for venting dissatisfaction closed. Yet dissatisfaction does not disappear. It transforms, accumulates, and erupts in daily life. That is why some say what is collapsing is not public security itself, but the model of governance. The link between work and survival is severed, the future is closed off, and the social safety valve is removed. This is why small stories seem to chain together. Behind them lies a massive structure. At the same time, administrative pressure intensifies. Large-scale campaigns reportedly target people with dual nationality or overseas ties, overseas Chinese communities, and an increasing number of cases involve people being stopped at airports or border crossings just as they enter or leave. Some are ordered to cancel their household registration or are barred from exit. For officials, educators, and state enterprise employees above certain ranks, travel approvals are said to have become multi-layered, with stricter passport controls. Crucially, the system loses flexibility and becomes mechanical, driven by a centralized data system. When an alert appears, movement stops immediately, with little room for negotiation. People who once crossed freely find themselves stopped for the first time not due to a personal case, but because the system has changed. Paradoxically, this explanation becomes believable. Household registration is not just paper. It is a control device, a classification tool, a chain. When deregistration and heightened surveillance advance together, going home ceases to be a family visit and becomes risk management. Mandatory lodging registration, device inspections, checks of social media activity. Someone says, "My hometown is no longer my home." When institutions move ahead of human feeling, society cools. In the corporate sphere, another crisis unfolds. To mask anxiety over technological competitiveness, companies resort to spectacle and excessive marketing. Product launches turn into fashion shows, celebrities are mobilized, queues are staged to manufacture a sense of frenzy. But when real experience fails to match the show, backlash comes quickly. Second-hand markets flood, complaints pile up in stores, trust erodes. The problem is not just the product, it is the lack of transparency and honest crisis response that destabilizes the entire brand. External pressure also accelerates. In Europe, reports suggest that debates over removing certain companies' equipment from telecom networks may shift from recommendations to legal mandates. The focus is not on whether a specific wrongdoing occurred, but whether the company could be compelled to act in state interests in the future. The blurrier the boundary between state and enterprise, the greater the political risk the company carries in the market. If that risk is unacceptable, the squeeze moves beyond a product, it targets the entire model. At the political core, unsettling signals accumulate. When military personnel changes occur ahead of the usual cycle, they often signal urgent repair and restructuring rather than orderly renewal. Replacements, disappearances, profiles, erased loose pieces that heighten public anxiety. When the top moves, the base loses even more ability to imagine tomorrow. Meanwhile, abroad, programs like Gold Card's residency through capital attract attention. For the wealthy, they offer the temptation of buying stability. But China's ultra-rich waver between interest and caution, security reviews, policy continuity, legal risk. Even with money, leaving is not a simple decision. None of this is isolated news. It is a chain. Unemployment rises, incomes shrink, trust breaks. The more trust breaks, the harder control becomes. The harder control becomes, the more those with resources seek exits. The more people seek exits, the tighter the system clamps down. The tighter it clamps down, the more ordinary people suffocate. Resentment accumulates and erupts in everyday life. It is a circular process of attrition. Most terrifying of all is that this kind of deterioration does not require a grand explosion. Repetition is enough. Frozen wages, addresses used as weapons, people detained at airports, truth replaced by performance. This repetition steals the last certainty. When people stop prioritizing, is it right, and focus only on, can I survive, society has already entered dangerous territory. What is being tested is not public order, but the sustainability of the system itself, human dignity, and the minimum trust in the future.